Welcome everyone to the second Arctic Circle virtual dialogue on the Greenland report, where we will now be hearing reactions from stakeholders in Greenland and discussing ways forward. My name is Halla Hrund. I'm a co-founder and co-director the Arctic Initiative at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's discussions. And I'd like to start by saying how wonderful it is to have so many of you tuning in again to talk about this issue and to see the new friendly faces that we have from across the world. So welcome all of you. As many of you know by now, the Greenland report was commissioned by Iceland's Minister for Foreign Affairs, Guðlaugur Thordarson. The work itself was then conducted by a former Minister for Foreign Affairs, Össur Skarphéðinsson, together with Unnur Brá Konráðsdóttir and Óttar Guðlaugsson. The report contains 99 specific recommendations on how to strengthen the relationship between Greenland and Iceland and covers everything from education to mining and tourism. It is based on the strong collaboration and friendship that is already in place between the two countries, but looks at opportunities to expand the horizon, given the changing Arctic. Today, we're going to be focusing on reactions from Greenland. And to do that, we have all of you here in the audience with us. And I'd like to ask you to join us in this open dialogue by submitting questions that you can do now through the Zoom bar. And then we have three esteemed speakers. We have Aki-Matilda Høegh-Dam, who's a member of the Danish parliament representing the Siumut party in Greenland. We have Nitter Sørensen, who's the CEO of Air Greenland. And then last but not least, we have Josephine Nymand, who's the head of department at the Greenland Institute for Natural Resources and also the chair of Greenland's Research Council. The run of the show will be the following. We will hear from these three presenters one by one, and then I will open up the floor for questions. And then after our dialogue, we will have a summary from the report chair, Mr. Össur Skarphéðinsson, before ending our time together today. But with that, I think we should start and use the time well. And I'd like to pass the floor now over to Aki-Matilda. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity for Siumut to also come with their statements about this this proactive initiative from Iceland. I believe that it's first and foremost very important to specify that Greenland is still under the influence of Denmark in one way or another. But Greenland is on its way to independence. Greenland is on its way to become a state. And in order for anyone to become a state, it is very important to have collaborations across the world in many different areas and in many different times of, it depends on what kind of subject you're talking about. And I believe that when we first saw this report, Siumut thought this is a very proactive initiative from Icelandic side in order for us to have an even more strengthened relationship with each other. It's very diplomatic and it's very thorough. There are already some initiatives and already a friendship between Iceland and Greenland that's been developing for quite some time. And some of these initiatives are on their process and on their way. And these are also subjects that can be up for discussion, but it is very important to specify that it looks very positive from Siumut's side as far as the whole general idea of it goes. Just talking about shipping routes. If Greenland ought to be independent, it also means that we want to open up to the rest of the world. It doesn't mean we want to be isolated, which is a very common mistake a lot of, especially people from Denmark, pursue. Being an independent state means that we open up to the rest of the world in a diplomatic manner, but also in the terms of collaborations for shipping and trading. And RAL have been a closed shipping company for Greenland for many, many years since the colonial times. And the cooperation between RAL and Eimskip are one of the first things ever that is beginning to open Greenland up to the rest of the world in order for us to trade with the rest of the world. In terms of tourism, which also is stated, it's very interesting because Greenland is now creating more opportunities for tourism, but our neighbors from Iceland have already a lot of experience in that matter, especially when you think about sustainability, especially when you think about the environment, especially when you think about that in Iceland there are around not 300,000 people, and in Greenland there are 56,000 people, and how to balance that out with how many tourists that's interested in going to the Arctic and see all the wonderful things that's here. The low cost for infrastructure goes both ways because Iceland has a lot of experience with that, but Greenland is also innovative in that way. If we look in South Greenland, they are developing a new form of stone that have been created in order to make houses. These house stones can have already won like around four different types of world records in terms of isolation, in terms of sturdity. And if we can collaborate in stuff like that, not only with Iceland, but also other things that have proactive initiative, they can be groundbreaking also for the environment. So generally, we have a lot of things to discuss. And I do believe this is a very great initiative from Icelandic side. I do believe that it would be great if other countries did the same and not only waited for Greenland to take the initiative, but also starting a collaboration and starting the discussions in various areas. We could potentially have a great relationship and great diplomatic solutions with each other. So from Greenland and Siumut's side, thank you for the initiative, and we are looking forward to talking more about the different ways we can collaborate with Iceland.
Thank you so much, Aki-Matilda, for your insightful comments. You covered a lot of ground there, ranging from international collaboration in the context of trade, in the context of tourism. And I think actually the tourism part is a great segue to our next presenter. We have the CEO of Air Greenland, Nitter Sørensen, and we're curious to hear from you from your industry perspective and the opportunities in the tourist sector. What is your first reaction to the context of the report? So over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, a big thank you to the organizers and all the participants who have chosen to spend an hour of your time on this very interesting and to us in Greenland very important subject. As has already been said, we're not for sale, but we're definitely open for business. So like Aki-Matilda said, I would begin by commending Össur and his committee for making this report. This is a clear invitation to dance, and we like to dance. The fact that Iceland decides to put time and effort into constructing this comprehensive report also shows that Greenland is an attractive dance partner. Thank you for highlighting this, which could serve as an inspiration to both Greenland and other nations, as well as has already been said. One thing that we in Greenland are always impressed by is the Icelandic entrepreneurial spirit and innovative and resilient business culture. That is something that we envy and like to get inspired by. So let this opening be the backdrop for the following. I've been asked to comment on the reactions on the landmark report from a business perspective, not just from my own sector. And businesses in Greenland welcome any opportunity to create increased growth and prosperity for both our businesses and for our country. Ultimately, we are fighting for a better future for our children and grandchildren, of course, and we are happy that Iceland has taken a stand to contribute towards these goals. One important goal that keeps me and my many skilled and hardworking colleagues in Air Greenland going every day is that any profit made in our company, in tourism, or in the fishing industry or mineral industry contributes to our society and brings us closer to economic self-reliance, which in turn brings us closer to the ultimate goal of achieving independence. It requires that we choose our dance partners carefully and that the dance is a balanced one. Choosing a dance partner is an important task. First of all, the partnership must be based on equality and be mutually beneficial in terms of synergies, and as partners, both parts have an obligation to boost confidence and performance with each other. This also includes making compromises on both sides of the fence, or the strait, as you could say. And in the case of the Greenland and Iceland relationship, I think that we already have very many good areas of cooperation already established. If you look at the Istak, they are now they have been building in Greenland in the past, and they are constructing the new super school in Nuuk. We have the fishing industry, where we see cooperation, especially in the pelagic sector and in the field of research already. In South Greenland, AEX Gold, founded by an Icelander, holds an exploitation license for gold. We have Blue West Helicopters, an Icelandic helicopter company active in Greenland, as well as Norland Air. We see Icelandic bonus products already in the Pacific low-cost supermarket Aki-Matilda. So we're already engaged in businesses. And now I'll get a little bit more concrete and direct in terms of reactions to the record, because from a business perspective, I think one of the reasons that Greenland is a little bit wary of entering into free trade agreements is because the business benefits so far have been a little unbalanced seen from our side, which is also reflected in the report. I understand that Iceland and other nations sees great potential in Greenland for their companies and businesses, but there must also be benefits going the other way. Because if we are to take this stance to the next level, it is important to focus on equal opportunities and building Greenland's economic independence. I just listed a number of foreign companies already active in Greenland, which is great. But the consensus amongst Greenland businesses is, however, that it seems to us that it is much harder for Greenlandic businesses to do business in, for example, Iceland than the other way around. And we have to change this if we are to truly strengthen the ties and exploit the obvious opportunities as we should. Another important issue to look at here is that the Greenland market and economy is a big mixture of commercial markets with potential for competition and a large portion of markets that needs government support to operate. And if free trade agreements and foreign business are allowed to tap into the attractive markets and taking the profits out of the country, then Greenland and potentially Denmark are once again left with the bill to pay in the not so attractive markets, so-called cream skimming. And an example of this is, of course, air travel, which is also part of the report. The whole domestic route network in Greenland is huge and extensive and very expensive to operate, with very few passengers to pay. Some routes that we operate have less than 1,000 passengers per year, but are still serviced several times per week. These routes are not government subsidized, as they would have been in many other countries in the world. And the way that the system is today, any airline could probably apply to fly these routes, and they would most likely be allowed. But why is it that only the attractive routes are being flown? Well, the answer is obvious. So we need to make sure that everyone is bringing something to the party, and this is some of the complexity that we need to work on in the future. And my last point is regarding our largest and most important industry, the fishing industry. Fishing is and will be the most important stepping stone towards economic growth in Greenland in the future. I commend Iceland for recommending increased research in the cold waters off East Greenland. There is great potential for increased sustainable fishing, but it's very important again that the bigger nations don't run us over, leaving our companies with the shortest straws when quota negotiations get real. Again, we are laying the foundation for the future of our children. So all in all, I think we should strengthen the communication, the dialogue, and engage in more real talks and discussions at both government and corporate level in order to home in on the relevant areas of cooperation for a mutual benefit. So to conclude, thank you, Iceland, for zooming in on Greenland. Thank you for inviting us to dance. We are ready. And now we just need to find out which dance to dance and start the music. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jakob, for these dance moves or this coverage and very thoughtful, I have to say, comments, very constructive comments for our dialogue. I look forward to diving deeper into some of the issues and opportunities that you highlighted in our question time together. But one of the areas where we focus on dancing, Iceland focuses on dancing in the report, relates to our next speaker, mining opportunities, collaboration with the mining industry. And Josephine Nymand, as I introduced her earlier, is the head of department of Greenland Institute of Natural Resources and also the chair of Greenland's Research Council. That of course relates to other aspects that Jakob, you touched upon, such as the fishing industry and so forth. But on the mining question, and maybe kind of zooming in, you already have dance partners from Australia, China, and others. And here Iceland is entering into the dance. What are your comments on this in the context of the report?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for. Well, I also just want to start by thanking for the invitation for sharing some of the way of my points of view regarding the mining industry. It struck me that a lot of space was put into the institutional name when it comes to fishery, but not when it comes to mining, because we are actually involved in advising the government on these issues. So I can see a lot of possibilities in the area of working together on mining related issues when it comes to the environment. It is true that a lot of foreign companies are working in Greenland already, and Iceland not as much as other countries, and there is definitely room for Iceland companies to join as well. One of the things that we are struggling with, as I see it, is the anchoring of knowledge in Greenland when it comes to research as well as to industry. It's the same as Jakob mentioned just before, that it's very easy to have fly-in, fly-out activities, but what we really need is the presence in Greenland at the Greenland research institutions or in the Greenland companies. So I appreciate very much the suggestions of exchange of students or employees or at all levels of competences. But in order for that to work successfully, we need the educated people in Greenland already. We need to have some level of education before we can send them out to learn even more. And that is, as I see, one of the really big challenges in Greenland. That's the primary school system. We are losing generations now because they are not as well educated as they should be, even though the research that is done shows that there are some problems there. And it's not a question of putting even more resources into it, because it is today, as stated in the report, the primary school system is allocated a huge amount of money, relatively more than any other schools in Europe or in the Nordic countries. So there are some other issues that we need to dig into, figure out what is it that is wrong and how can we actually make this better. And then we will have the educated youngs that we can send abroad. I want to make point attention to another thing that we are struggling with, and that is a lot of our young students, they don't wish to travel abroad for a long period of time. They prefer to stay in Greenland, and there are numbers of reasons for that, but that is something that we have to improve on. We have to prepare our students that it's okay to go abroad for a shorter period of time as well, because any travel outside to see other research institutions, other businesses, is a benefit for the Greenland research communities or the Greenland businesses when they come back. Mm-hmm. I think I'll stop there, so there will be room enough for discussions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much also for your constructive and thoughtful and informative remarks on the school system and how that plays into all of this. There were several opportunities listed in the report that relate specifically to education. Also how we can better use online collaboration in education. So there might be some opportunities in that space, and that kind of to zoom out and start our dialogue. I want to ask you a very broad question. After the report was published, our Minister for Foreign Affairs here in Iceland, Minister Thordarson, had a meeting with then his counterpart in Greenland, Sten Linge. And one of the outputs of that conversation was that there was a need to structure some sort of a agreement that would highlight several priorities and specify the objectives more thoroughly. So if we just do a quick tour, and maybe starting with you, Aki-Matilda, if you just had to name 3 things that you would like to see on the top of that list, if you were crafting the agreement, what should be the 3 things that must be in there?
That's a tough question. But I do believe that first and foremost, we have to have a cooperation between the 2 countries, which we already have.
Yeah.
We have to have some kind of respect within each other for us to move forward. And I think it's important that these diplomatic relations also go in the terms of a democratic process where you include the different kind of parties in terms of which sector we're going to talk about. So if we're going to talk about tourism, which is one of the things I think it's important to also talk about, we have to have people like from Air Greenland, we have to have people that actually works in the tourism industries in order for us to find the common ground we can move forward on. I think one of the other things is definitely the environment, because everything we're going to talk about, even if it's business relations, even if it's tourism, and if it's if it's research, we are always going to go back to the defining thing about the environment, because it's very, very important that we keep our mind in that, especially as we are both Arctic nations. And as Arctic nations, it's important for us to look at the differences we have, but also the similarities we have. Because if we're going to talk about tourism, we have to talk about the sustainable way of creating tourism. We have to talk about what we're going to do with the what do you call it? The trash that's going with it, right? The pollution that goes with, the big ships with the heavy fuel oil, and what are you going to do with the collaboration in terms of how to make sure that the airports are used well with the locals. But definitely, I would say, personally, I think these are 3 very important things. The business sector in whole, which includes shipping, which includes collaborations between the 2 countries, which includes the cheap infrastructure creation we also talked about, because that's also, if you're going to create businesses, you have to also have a great fundament for how to create the places, especially if you look at the capital in Nuuk. We have many businesses, but we need space for creating more. We need infrastructure. We are an island society. We can't just create roads. So we have to be innovative, which also brings back to researching. So researching in terms of sustainability, research in terms of the Arctic nation and how to create a better environment for our world together, but also research in terms of infrastructure, research in terms of creating sustainable housing, research in terms of Arctic innovative solutions for the different areas of, what do you call it? Oh, I just lost the words, I'm sorry. The different challenges. I'm sorry, I was looking for the word challenges. The different challenges we need, because we are an Arctic society, because we live in a society where everything can easily be filled with snow, where we live in societies that have mountains, or as in Iceland's volcanoes. So we have to be innovative in the way we are. I think one of the problems is that because Greenland have been a colony for so long, a lot of the time Greenland thinks about Denmark in order to what should we aspire to. Stop thinking about it, trying to aspire to Greenland. Stop to aspire to being like Denmark or the Nordic model. We have to create our own model. And I think one of the reasons to do that is with the 3 things I just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Aki-Matilda. I hear the red thread of sustainable development.
Yes.
Inclusiveness for these different sectors, how we can collaborate towards sustainable development, and that
Definitely
relates to the economy, that relates to the environment, and so forth. And that's a great note to segue, I think, into your comments, Jakob, because that's very related to of course, the business sector, but the tourist industry as well. So if you were the one crafting this agreement, could you name the 3 things that are the must things to have there?
Yes, and I think
3 favorite dances, as you would frame it.
Yes, and in terms of tourism, I think there's actually already cooperation going on. So and I think that is just a normal that's a normal business, that's a normal market. So we don't need a government pushing in that area. It's already happening. It's already doing its thing because it's driven by the markets. So that's actually not on my list because it will happen anyway, especially with the new infrastructure in Ilulissat and Nuuk. So I'm not so worried in terms of the hardcore business area. So I would put on my list, number 1, mutual knowledge. If you are to build a relationship, you have to know each other. You have to you get to know each other. So I would suggest that number 1 on the list would be that we start to increase the mutual knowledge of each other's countries and habits and everything. And that can be done at school level, that can be done at the cultural level, exchange of movies, books, arts, and so on. So number 1, mutual knowledge. The other one is education. Josephine touched on education. Education is very, very important, of course. And in the field of education, we are probably a little bit behind Iceland, or we are behind Iceland. And so I think in the field of education and in terms of interpretation, construction of distant learning material in a language that our students can understand would be another very important issue to make accessible education. And the last one would be the fishing industry, because fishing is Greenland's by far biggest industry. It's 97% of the Greenlandic exports is fishing. So it's just so important to us that research and that we can just keep building a sustainable fishing industry, because that's what keeps everything else going in the end. So mutual knowledge, education, and fishing. Sorry that tourism didn't come on the list, but that's because I think it will happen anyway. So we'll need to spend our time and energy wisely.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for providing that list. I think, again, you mentioned fisheries, and that's obviously in the context of natural resources, a natural segue to you, Josephine. If you add to that list, what are there some items missing that haven't been highlighted here?
Well, I'm sorry, but I would like to take a little bit of a different approach, because quite a few of the recommendations in the report is actually already happening on a small scale, or is very easy applicable. And I suggest that first and foremost, just go ahead with all the low-hanging fruits and get started with collaboration in those areas. And then we can have, the next step will be to develop the more resource demanding collaborative initiatives. And we have to remember, no matter what kind of collaboration or initiatives we will initiate, it needs resources of some kind. And we have, we can do a lot of research, but we need the human as well as the economical resources to do so. So we have to bear in mind that that is an important thing to bring along. But I would say the easy projects, go ahead with them, and then we will have focus on the rest.
Thank you. That's a great segue, actually. I'm going to ask the Arctic Circle team to pull up the first question, because this is, you're kind of touching up on a strategy here. And the first question that we have from the audience comes from Holly Parker in the US, and that's on research and education, asking what research and education partnerships benefit Greenland's university and institutions most in supporting its development goals. So if you could, Josephine, maybe start here and kind of dive deeper into your thoughts on the strategy element.
Well, the sustainability goals of Greenland has been on, it has at least for the last many years been on the natural resources, the fisheries industry. And the research and education within that has been kind of lagging because we don't have an education at the university level for fishery or natural sciences yet. We are working on developing that, but we do not have it yet. But we have the Greenland Institute of Natural Resources, or Bilateral, that is a well-funded and well-established research institution which collaborate with Iceland as well as a lot of other countries on a lot of topics. So I think that we do not have put in place yet the structure that can support the development of sustainable use of natural resources within the educational system, but we are moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm. We'll move along, and the next one I would like to start with you, Aki-Matilda. It is relates to Denmark, and the question is, how has the Danish foreign policy community reacted to Iceland's growing attention to Greenland, for an example, the report and its recommendations? If you could provide, this is from Takashi Kai in Sweden, if you could provide somewhat the big picture here.
To be quite honest, I haven't really noticed anything reduced, what do you say, some big drama about it, or not really anything that sets off an alarm, which is very positive in my mind. I also think it's also has something to do with the history. If you look at one of the ones that have had an consulate, an embassy, if you will, in Greenland, it has always been Iceland. Iceland have been here for many years. So when other bigger nations try to do the same, for example, when the United States wanted a consulate in Greenland, that created a lot more tension than it did when Iceland moved forward with this recommendation, I would say.
Thank you so much. Maybe to expand on this part and ask you, you represent one political party in Greenland. Can you talk about reaction as a whole from to this report in a more broader context?
Well, in a more broader context, you mean what our
political context in Greenland?
So what the report is in the political context? Well, in Greenland, I believe it's much more like very positive about the initiative that have begun, because a lot of the world's eyes are on Greenland at the moment, and us Greenlandic politicians, we notice, we feel it. I think we, especially at this moment, are under an election. So a lot of the time people talk about election stuff. There's election both in the Greenlandic parliament, but also in the municipalities at the first time ever that has been set for the same date. But the thing is that a lot of Greenlandic politicians notice that the whole world is watching. So people that takes initiative in order to take contact with Greenland is always well received, especially because Greenland wants to open up for the rest of the world in one way or another. And when people take the initiative to talk about a possible collaboration with Greenland, people are very happy to talk to the different politicians from the other countries in order to create a diplomacy.
Thank you. And I maybe move over to you, Jakob, related to kind of the same question from the business perspective. You mentioned that you were speaking here representing more than the tourist industry. Can you elaborate a bit more on how you've, through the dialogues preparing for this meeting, how the reaction you feel like from the broader business community, and maybe what people are most excited about, or in that context, some interesting dance ideas that came to the front. So I continue with that description.
Yeah, I think the reactions go along the lines of what Aki-Matilda said, that it's always nice when someone gives you attention. So positive in that way, proactive move. But I think also a bit of skepticism, especially from a business point of view, because to be honest, Icelanders are very good businessmen. So a little bit of, okay, this is interesting. How can we make sure, like I said in my presentation, that we all benefit from this? So I think it's sort of a little bit mixed, positive with the attention, and then a little bit more, what can we add? What can Iceland add? And how do we actually make this a mutual beneficial thing for the future? So definitely positive interest, I would say.
Fantastic, and that's a nice segue actually into our next question from the audience. That is from Denmark, from Mats Quist Fredriksson. What is the biggest obstacle for further economic cooperation between Greenland and Iceland? And since you're talking about obstacles, I think, you mentioned earlier, Josephine, the need for resources. And I assume you mentioned human resources, but there are other types of resources. So maybe if we start with you here.
Well, the obstacles or the barriers that we need to cross for more collaboration is, something as Jakob mentioned in his introduction, that there needs to be benefits for the Greenland partner to engage in collaboration, no matter if it has to do with economy or science or whatever. But I think that some things that we need in Greenland is help and advice on how to do things. And that's in all the areas that has been mentioned in the report as I see it. I recall that when in Iceland you have matches where you can come and get help if you have an idea on how to develop something, and we need something similar here where you can get be pointed in the right direction, what to do, where to contact, who to contact, and so on. That would be a huge help for Greenland partners to engage in all sort of collaborations with partners in Iceland.
Thank you, Josephine. That's actually a brilliant area for collaboration, since there's so much happening in Iceland in that kind of business accelerator environment. We already see a lot of that, of course, happening in the US through the Harvard community and so forth. So a lot of dots that could be connected and a lot of knowledge that could be brought together in that space. I think that's actually a great segue into our next question from the audience. And I would like to encourage you here in the audience to continue to send in questions. We have 3 people here speaking on this panel, but we want to hear from all of you. So please don't be shy. Now is your moment to send in a question. But I want to ask you, the next question is from Norway, and it's from Rasmus Getsjø Bertelsen. He asked the question, how can other countries collaborate most effectively with Greenland for a more independent Greenland? So if we broaden this up and look at kind of other countries, how can collaboration be done more effectively with Greenland for a more independent Greenland? Do you want to start, Josephine? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Jakob, if we invite you and then end with you, Aki-Matilda, do a full circle.
Regarding independence, I'm not all of my personal opinion is that when we have educated people and then we will also move naturally towards an independent country. It's a bit difficult for me at present to see how we within the next few years can reach independence, but that's from a practical on the floor point of view. We do collaborate with other countries when it comes to research. For example, we have established a very well a framework for collaboration with the United States, and we have set the frames, and we are planning on having these frames and for collaboration to be kind of double to other countries, so it will be easier to collaborate with Greenland, because then everybody knows how to do it. So I think that having a framework for collaboration will ease the access from other countries to engage in Greenland.
Jakob, any comments from you on this particular question?
I think actually it's a very good question, but I think we also actually in Greenland have to ask ourselves what we can do to encourage, because right now what I'm seeing is that a lot of countries are showing interest. Of course, that is the whole subject of today's discussion, I guess. So I think we actually have to in Greenland just reevaluate our situation and see how can we actually, like Josephine says, create these forums for collaboration, because the interest is there. A lot of countries travel to Greenland and meet up with different stakeholders and so on, but I think we need to structure it a little bit more. So I think it's a question that goes the other way and say we here in Greenland have to sit down and talk both within businesses and also on the political scene and say, how do we actually manage this growing interest of Greenland? Because right now it's sort of an unstructured approach. Every time someone comes, someone else is showing interest, and so we don't have a structured approach to this new situation and the new geopolitical position that Greenland is finding itself in. So I think actually that's something that I'll take that question and write it down and go back and say, guys, we need to sit down and talk about this. Mm-hmm. So it's not so much what other countries can do, it's actually more we have to do something.
Exactly. Thank you for that, bringing this home, and I guess that's a perfect thought also in the context of the report, because now there's like a menu of options, 99 recommendations. It's like a dinner menu, and you can pick courses and develop collaboration. So I guess that's a good menu to have as a base for discussion in that perspective. But Aki-Matilda, any final thoughts from you before we run to the next question?
Sure, thank you very much. And I also want to thank Rasmus for the question. I think it's a very important question. First of all, there might be some different opinions here. First of all, I do believe we have a lot of educated Greenlanders, and it should be appointed that our education system have been growing over the years more than ever. And even though that at the latest report, a lot of the young people have chosen not to go directly into further education, we have also proved that never before have so many Greenlanders have finished a higher education in university, and never before have so many Greenlanders finished other terms of education also. And these are also very, very valuable to look at. I even made my own list of people I knew who finished a longer education and that were Greenlanders. I went up to 500 people. And that is to remind us that we are at this moment 56,000 Greenlanders. So a lot of educated people are in Greenland at the moment and very capable of making collaborations with other countries. I also do believe in the political atmosphere, at least. There are very proactive initiatives from the Greenlandic government and the Greenlandic parliament side in terms of collaborations with other countries, and there have been made a lot of structures on how to do so. I do think that there are great collaborations with the different representatives from Greenland in both Brussels and the United States, even creating a new representation in China. I think there are a lot of initiatives going from Greenland, but I would rather focus on Rasmus's questions, which at this moment is what can other countries do? And this is what I find very interesting, because this is what I would say Iceland has done. Because even though Greenland have been proactive in their own way, in our own way, I do think it's very important that other countries is proactive as well and come with solutions that we can meet with and talk about, because Greenland is on its way to become independent. We can see that in both the education level, we can see that in the growth of economy, and we can see that in growth of the will for the diplomacy. And at this moment, we only need to know what other countries wants to contribute with. So we have other countries like France have also tried to make collaborations with Greenland in terms of animation, for example, and research. It's very interesting to see how further we can go with this in terms of what do my country can provide and what can your country provide, and we have to take this discussion, and one of the partners have to be the initiative partners, and I do think it's very proactive when one of these countries also takes the initiative.
Thank you, Aki-Matilda. This is actually a perfect segue to our wrap-up. We have Össur Skarphéðinsson, Mr. Össur Skarphéðinsson, who is Iceland's former Minister for Foreign Affairs and led the work of this report. Össur, can you provide some final remarks and summarize the discussion here? And I think Aki-Matilda's contribution of how important it is to show initiative, but at the same time have the dialogue at home and find that perfect marriage. You know, we all want to be in a marriage that works well over time. So what is your key takeaway from the discussion here? How can we build that marriage from this report and the dialogue that we've had here today?
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, all four of you, for very insightful contributions. And I now know that Jakob Nitter, he probably is the best dancer in Greenland, but he has to know as well that even I have a past in that as well. But to tell you the truth, Jakob and the rest, this report really is a dancing exercise. Jakob would be able to tell all of us that to be a good dancer and be beautiful on the floor, you have to know to whom you are dancing. So, I mean, the report does not contain proposals for a quick fix. It is a long-term view, at least from the Icelandic side. But all of you, if I try to sum up what all of you really are conveying, well, I could say that you ooze the confidence that I feel when I am in Greenland, and that is a change from 1994-5 when I started coming to Greenland. Greenland has a lot of confidence, especially in the last few years, and I think you're absolutely right. When you approach a report like this, even though it is from your closest neighbor, with a bit of carefulness, even wariness, as I detected from Jakob Nitter, because at this point in time, the geopolitical changes that have happened in the Arctic have suddenly thrust Greenland to the forefront. Certainly, the whole world is able to see that Greenland is something unique. And then I'm not only talking about the unique nature that Greenland has to offer in its promise as a land of great Arctic tourism in the future. I'm also talking about Josephine's specialty, which is the minerals. The mineral reserves in Greenland, of course, are also very, very interesting from the point of view of the superpowers. And I could go on. The common interest that we have, Greenland and Iceland, mostly today, is of course the fisheries. But the uniqueness of Greenland has thrust it into the front pages of all the media. And of course, President Trump did Greenland a great favor when he offered to buy it, because even if he insulted some people in Greenland and even in Denmark, what he did was to put the attention of the world on Greenland. And I have to say, at this point in time, I would exactly have the same reaction as most of you have. Well, let's wait and see what the world has to offer to us. Now then, the relationship between Iceland and Greenland, however, is something special. We are the closest neighbors. You are the closest neighbors that we have in the world. And surprisingly, there is, especially from the last decade, the relations between Iceland and Greenland have grown a lot. There's a lot of, for example, collaboration and cooperation in aviation and tourism. But still, tourism is a very small part, really, as yet, of Greenland's industries. Fisheries are very, very big. Greenland derives 93% of its export income from fisheries. But wouldn't you find it a bit strange that those two great fishing nations, Greenland with its newly modernized fishing fleet, they do not have any research at all between those two countries in fisheries? that perhaps epitomizes the relationship between the countries. We respect each other. There's a lot of friendship. We even love each other, to judge by the latest survey that was done and published by Nuuk University 2 or 3 weeks ago. But surprisingly, and this is one of the main findings from my point of view, as an ex-minister and as the chairman of this committee, I was surprised by how little formal relationship there was between the countries, between the administrations. I take as an example, which is not very good for my nation, that even if we have had for the last decade every prime minister of Greenland visiting Iceland, there are 20 years since the Icelandic prime minister went on an official visit to Greenland. So, I mean, this is something that we have to look at. If we look at the fisheries, which is so of such a great common interest for both of the nation, we have 5 or 6 migratory stocks that we sort of own partly together, and still we're not doing research on them. Greenland, of course, is becoming a sizable fishing nation, and that, of course, we can anticipate that in future that there will be some conflicts between Iceland and Greenland on the fisheries scene, of course. The way to prevent that is to do joint research, and that is why there is so much emphasis on fishing in this report. It's because the importance of that particular industry is so big for both countries, and also it's the only field where I can, with some reliability, predict that if we don't sort of join forces better, there might be some kind of a conflict between Iceland and Greenland, and that is not something that we want to do. There was a question from Hallafrund, what are the 3 main topics if I had to choose from 99 proposals? Of course, as Josephine said, there's a lot of low-hanging fruits. Some are more in the future, but the ones that I would like to focus on, and none of you mentioned that, it is energy, because Iceland is a specialist in energy, in hydropower, also in geothermal, that surprisingly, my experts in Iceland say you have a little bit of. But anyway, if you look at the hydropower potential, it's huge in Greenland. We have already cooperated on, I think, 4 of your 5 big hydropower plants, but one, because Aki mentioned the emphasis and cooperation on research. I mean, in Iceland, we have been doing some very fine research on micro hydropower plants. One of the proposals of the report is that we should join forces on that gradually, step by step, and start with East Greenland because it's closest to Iceland. And we should work on that in order to assist to the mutual benefit of industries in both countries to, at least, let's phrase it like this, assist the Greenlandic government to reach its goals for 2030, about 90% of the energy consumed coming from renewable sources. I mention this because we have a common past in this, and this also involves research. And from my point of view, this is quite important. Now, somebody of you mentioned fisheries. Well, at the University in Nuuk, I was a bit surprised to find at this point in time almost no work being done to prepare a fisheries department. I mean, your bread and butter, like ours, is fishing. One of the proposals in the report that I value the most is on remote learning. And I can also tell you that it is the proposal that has created greatest response from different parts in Greenland, different schools, even different levels, down to primary level, which surprised me. But one of the, let's say, long shot proposals in the report also touches on the desire of the US to connect with Greenland, in fact, also with Iceland in terms of education. And we have in the biggest town in Northern Iceland, the University of Akureyri. I mean, there we have specialists. We have a small fisheries department, but that's a unique university in the world because it's one of 5 universities in the whole world that is totally based on remote learning. And a proposal is made on a cooperation between the University in Nuuk and the University in Akureyri, and as a later stage, to make those 2 universities a kind of centers of a virtual university on fisheries that will be connected to universities on the coast in US and in Canada. This may be a long shot, but already this has generated some unexpected interest. I just mentioned this to try to illustrate that firstly, we have a lot of common interest. Secondly, we are very close to each other, and naturally, nations like ours should work together. And then finally, to sum up, I come to this fact, I mean, at least 2 of you have mentioned the independence of Greenland. In Iceland, we believe that at some point in time, of course, Greenland will be an independent country. And it will be of great interest to both nations if they support each other, if they show each other solidarity. It will be a political advantage apart from economic advantage. So on the whole, I just want to thank you for the positive response that I get from all of you, and I really hope that you are reflective of the general population in Iceland, and I wish you well, and I would really look forward to dance with all of you in future.
Thank you so much, Össur, and thanks to all the panelists here. I think we are indeed looking at finding the right rhythm, finding the right moves for the happy marriage, how we can continue this dialogue. I see this as just a warm-up, just a start. I want to thank the organizers and for all of you, dear audience, for tuning in today. And at the same time, before we say goodbye, remind you that on March 25th at 2 p.m. Central Time, we will have the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, Thomas Patrick, discussing his country's application as an observer for the Arctic Council. So we welcome you to rejoin for another virtual dialogue then. But again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to exploring this issue in other avenues further. Thank you.